So hello everyone, I'm very happy to introduce Nicolas Bourriaud, who is the chief curator, the main curator of Kaunas Biennial, and a very prominent figure in contemporary art, who has been present in various institutions, starting from Palais de Tokyo, you've been the founder of Palais de Tokyo as well, and also the curator, and you worked for so many important newspapers and magazines, Documents sur Art and Flash Art as well, and collaborated, and you were a curator at Tate Britain, and curated the Tate Triennale called Ultramodern, and also were a director of École Nationale Supérieure des Beaux-Arts in Paris, one of the main institutions in the world, basically. So a really interesting and prominent figure of contemporary art scene for a few decades. And now you are here in Lithuania curating a show in Kaunas, and it seems it is not your first encounter with Lithuanian contemporary art scene. I remember in 2012 in Palais de Culture Communication Center, you held, it was held an exhibition, Prestige Phantasmagoria Now. It was called this way, and the catalog featured your text on the exhibition, and also you were present at the opening, if I'm not mistaken. Sure. So now you come back with another show on Phantasmagoria and Kaunas Biennial, which is called Fred, Phantasmagoria About Distance. What's so special about this unifying element of Phantasmagoria and Lithuania? Is it a phantasmagoric country or what?
No, not exactly. I actually accepted to write this catalog text because it was already also part of my own thinking. So I've been working on about Walter Benjamin's ideas mainly, and this is where it came from for me. So I was really happy to participate to this exhibition in Klaipėda, which was at a very different angle on the idea of phantasmagoria. So I thought that anyway the theme was not totally, fully exploited, and there was many other things to say. And what interested me first is this idea of phantasmagoria as a kind of unknown ancestor of contemporary art, because at the very end of the 18th century, people like Richardson, the Abbé Richardson, for example, invented a very spectacular way mixing science and spiritism to produce a new type of spectacle, a new type of involvement also of the audience. At the time, it was really the first participating audience, because they were actually obliged to follow a certain path within very bizarre, weird buildings, in Paris. And so this kind of common route between film and art was actually interesting me a lot. And then Walter Benjamin's idea of phantasmagoria, comes up totally at the front of this discussion, because it was actually his way to understand Karl Marx's, theories. The idea of phantasmagoria as a kind of projection of a given civilization about itself. Phantasmagorias are everywhere, and Walter Benjamin wrote this Passagenwerk book about how, in every detail of its structure, a given civilization produces an image, a kind of super image of itself, which is phantasmagoria. And it relates also to the ghost dance that Karl Marx, talks about. The idea that the product acquires, human abilities, and the worker is becoming an object. So let's say it's different ideas intertwined, and it's always this kind of intrications that actually produce an exhibition, and that's the case here. It is an exhibition about distance. That's the main idea, transporting moving bits or moving atoms, and there could not be a better place to do it than a post office.
But you mentioned Karl Marx, and I wonder, because if I might mention another philosopher who is related with Karl Marx and with the ghostly appearances, that would be Jacques Derrida in Spectres of Marx, who elaborates this idea, which is already present in Marx's Capital, about the commodities that has this phantasmagoric appearance, and he talks about the table which dances as if it was real. But then what Derrida take is here, he notices a very interesting point that we lead this analysis to the end, we find that basically spectral or ontology, as he calls it with H, is not really something that is created and illusional or fictional, but is a very interesting part of reality. It is already there. The phantasmagoria is here. The thing is that we cannot really solve the problem only by reducing it to the false consciousness, as Marx puts it. So, do you think, and also I find it in your idea of the exhibition of the show, that the parallel between internet virtual realities and the fact that we are here in the post office and the telegraph element, you kind of link this problem with nowadays challenges and with the question of technology as well. So what would be the ghost of 21st century? Are we dealing with something still not understood in a way, still not conceived? Phantasmagoria is a part of reality in a way, but the reality in a way fulfilled and entangled in the virtual reality.
Actually, one could say that nowadays the future is our own ghost. Ghosts used to come from the past before. Yes. Now it seems that they are coming from the future, and the future itself, the idea of future, has become a kind of ghost haunting us, because all our versions of future coming from the past have completely vanished. So they become ghosts some way. In curatorial terms, this idea of the haunting or the spectral is very essential to this exhibition in a way. First, because it's a post office. At the top of this building, that was the place where actually people were trying to stop the Voice of America by blurring the emissions. This building has a strong past. It has a very specific position in the city of Kaunas, and ghosts are too numerous to be named. Actually, it's our history, and the way our history was actually projecting things into the future, but we didn't really realized actually. So the idea was to take into account for this exhibition the very history, not only of the building, but as many things possible in a way. Keeping echoes. It's a kind of echo chamber. And that's also the very specific quality of this building, and the way I tried to keep it as a kind of ready-made in a way, not to transform it too much. We kept the walls as they were mostly, except when we were really obliged to hang something or to change, but it needed to be taken as a kind of as an object. Actually, it's an object. It's not a white cube. It's not a universal contemporary art space. It's a very specific building in a very specific town. And then the exhibition welcomes all the possible ghosts of this situation.
Oh, that's a very interesting insight of yours regarding the ghost of the future. It's really challenging because, as you put it rightly, usually the ghost is associated with something of the past. And now, in a way, this past might provoke future. So don't you think, in a way, that we need to reform ourselves, that the question about contemporary art is pretty often related with the transformation of the spectator, emancipation of the spectator, as Jacques Rancière put it, for example. in a way that we might change not only the way of understanding, but also the way of imagining the future. And in relation to your idea that first phantasmagorians were prototypes of contemporary artists, I have one doubt, because among them there was a recurrent practice to manipulate human, emotions and consciousness. They would make the Hitchcock-style experiences of horror in clothes, environments, and so on and so forth. But do we need that element of hardcore illusion in our mind, or rather we need to encounter the horror of the future, because future is terrifying because of many cases, because of whatever, global warming and refugees crisis or whatever that are constantly surrounding us, and we are kind of deceiving ourselves constantly.
These strengths of manipulation and these techniques of illusion are actually everywhere around us. They are in the city already. You don't need art for it anymore. Art is rather a space-time where you can deconstruct, and analyze and put into perspective all those strengths of manipulation. It's a kind of editing table for all the illusions that are actually produced, by any city, in Europe or many other places. It's relates also to, I think, the core of the 20th century avant-gardes, which, according to me, was this difference between activity and passivity. Every important work in the 20th century came across those ideas. How to make the viewer an active individual, how to break passivity, how is it possible to emancipate. Then that would be a different version of emancipation, is how to make people active, how to produce as many activities as possible. I think that's one of the hidden, agendas of 20th century avant-garde. But today, it takes a very specific form, because we are overwhelmed by images, we're overwhelmed by information. So our capacity of navigation throughout those information clouds and our ability to decode and use images become the main subject, the main topics today. And I think in this exhibition you have also a feeling of that, quite clearly, if you are.
It's a very interesting topic regarding activity and passivity. Do you think contemporary art scene is, in general, not necessarily about talking about this exhibition, is succeeding in provoking that type of activity? Since, there is a common critique towards contemporary art in general, that it becomes a very closed and hermetic, in a way that you need a special preparation in order to understand and to become the part of the process. So how do you see art situation in general, I think in the challenge of passivity?
Every activity, whatever it is, contemporary art, cinema, food, needs a specific type of education, actually. If you go to a restaurant and you don't have any idea of the culinary culture, you're just nourishing yourself, you're not eating. That's exactly the same for images, actually. One has to learn how to read images. It's a specific history, it's a specific relationship to life that you have to learn. Learning is the most beautiful word in English, frankly. It's essential to learn. So when people say, criticize contemporary art because they have to learn something or to be taught something, so what? That's absolutely normal. If you want to speak Chinese, you have to learn Chinese, right? So it's exactly the same. If you don't know the rules of tennis, you will only see, looking at Federer against Djokovic, you will only see two dumb people, pushing a ball above a net. And then if you discover the rules or history of tennis, you can compare with Rod Laver or John McEnroe. That's exactly the same for art. The more you learn, the more you're able to develop your own activity and to give different perspective to what you are looking at. And that's this activity, this energy, which is really important.
And what's the role of a curator then in this tennis game of contemporary art? I mean, I remember I read a recent interview with Caroline Bakargiev, and she said she's not a curator, she's a draftsperson, because curating is an overused word. What would be your idea of curating, also talking about this show, particular show?
Well, for every show that I'm curating, I would, if you want to use a metaphor, I could maybe use the series Twin Peaks. I feel a bit like the special agent Dale Cooper, arriving in Twin Peaks every time I curate an exhibition, because you discover a different context. You get familiar with the people, with the history, with the places, and you have to solve kind of enigma, which is what should I do here? What would be the most significant act? I could what the most important theme? How can I adjust my own theories to this? And that's kind of riddle in a way. And then there are many other aspects, but that's the first one. I think this idea of foreignness is super important. And I want to remain a foreigner on the whole planet. Actually, it's really important to be a foreigner. I think that's constitutive of the curiosity that this job requires.
But then how do you select artists and how do you find them? Also for this exhibition, for example, there is a list of international Lithuanian names, and do you need to get in contact, or you look after their work and practices, or you have other curatorial tools, for example?
Well, for every exhibition, and last year I curated Taipei Biennial, in Taiwan, so it was a very different context. But I always proceed the same way. First, there's a kind of obvious list that's coming, so you just write the first list of names, and then you explore a little bit their work to see what could really correspond. And then you do some specific researches for the exhibition you're doing. So that's the second layer of names. And then, like for here or for Taipei, it was exactly the same. I asked people to send me informations. So I try to get my way through this cloud of informations, artist files, etc. And then after you combine those three layers, you get more or less an idea of the general shape of the exhibition, and then you can erase a few names if you think. Sometimes it's very intuitive. It's the intuition of a specific shape that the exhibition will have at the end. It's going to provide a very specific image, and you want to match this image. You look for it. Sometimes you fail, sometimes you succeed.
And talking about Lithuanian scene, have you been facing the names of Lithuanian artists before you started working specifically with Lithuania? And then is it present as a contemporary art scene? How do you think about it?
Absolutely. My first trip to Vilnius was maybe 2002 or something like that. Then I came back to Klaipėda, Vilnius again, and I've been here only this year 3 times in Kaunas. But at the end, you get a kind of knowledge, even minimal, of what's going on. And some people obviously I've been working with, even at Palais de Tokyo at the time. So Lithuanian scene, is also. A lot of artists are actually working abroad or travel a lot, so it's a scene which is very visible, so it's not a big problem. I didn't want to work here with artists from Lithuania that I already knew before, Diamantas, Narkevičius, or this generation, I knew already a bit too much. I prefer for this specific space, work with people I didn't know before. No, it was also, I wanted to discover a few new works, new approaches.
By the way, there is a Baltic Triennale in Vilnius opened just a few weeks ago, and it is full of also collaboration between Lithuania and international artists. It would be an interesting dialogue between your exhibition and that one. So I'm looking forward if you have any ideas on that. I suppose you haven't seen anything yet, but...
No, we had a discussion with the curator in last August, actually, so she explained me a bit the project, and yeah.
Of Vilnius, Baltic, oh, really? Of Virginia, you know? So, anyway, continuing this discussion on the exhibition making, on the process of producing art, I'm always wondering, and I have these discussions with students who constantly complain about the quality of art, saying that, you know, what are the criteria of good art? Okay, we might have many artists who have specific practices and maybe even grasp the tendencies and say, this is what is now pretty, you know, fashionable or trendy, and I do that or this, and I can only be in touch with curator or be a friend of curator and exploit a certain nepotism and become a part of the scene, because it's not about the craft anymore. It's really about ideas and really getting into relations, as you put it in your relational aesthetics. Producing certain relations or being the part of them. So, do you think that in this complicated issue and context, there is still a criterion for good art, or maybe you have yourself?
You mean besides knowing personally people?
Yeah.
No. Well, knowing personally the artist is not such a problem. It's Harald Zeman in the 1960s always said that in every of his exhibitions there were, you know, 1/3 friends, 1/3, you know, emerging artists, 1/3, you know, confirmed artists. This 1/3 of friends, you know, were people like Joseph Beuys, Donald Judd, etc. So I try to have good friends like this actually for every exhibition. If you get deeper into an artist's work, you know, obviously you can develop, you know, a friendship, but that's absolutely nothing to do with the. I don't invite my friends to every exhibition. That's the obvious, you know. But sometimes a friend, you know, can be part of it. If it's Pierre Huyghe, for example, he's a very good friend for 20 years, you know. So, but I think he's quite a good artist. So, but more seriously, the criterion is you have first a universal criterion, I would say, which is the quality of the work in itself without being in any curatorial context. Mm-hmm. And then you have, for a specific project, a different set of criterions that are moving, you know, according to the project you're doing. The project in Taipei I did last year, I had to develop a different set of criterions, you know, to write the list of artists. But in general, anyway, I have to believe in the strength of the work. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it's I wouldn't invite an artist I think he or she is not an important artist or someone who has a potential, you know, for any project, you know, because an artwork is, if you want to put it plain and simple, an artwork is always the emission of something. You produce a signal, right? Leonardo da Vinci, when he paints the Mona Lisa, you know, is emitting a signal. This signal has been so loaded with energy when he painted it and complexity that it survived the centuries. No, it's the amount of energy that's produced at the very beginning that allows an artwork to sustain itself through the centuries. I've never finished talking about Vermeer or Rembrandt or Mondrian or whoever, you know, Piero della Francesca. You know, you can talk about it for hours. It's an energy that's never that sustains itself through time. And I think the criterion is the energy you feel at this very moment when you see an artwork. If you have the intuition that it's such a complex work that it will actually sustain for many years. That's my main criterion in a way. That's what could be called beauty, if you want to put a name on it. But beauty is not only something visible. Sometimes it goes much beyond the visible in an artwork.
Yeah, you mentioned veikia, and I thought it would be really pertinent to this show, since you constantly elaborates the idea of fiction and reality that are interrelated. And I remember in one of his interviews he put it that he never works with reality and never works with fiction. He works with fiction that is within reality.
Then intertwining of the two.
And he enhances the fiction that is already present. So, that of course, he's such an important artist that it's so difficult to have it here. But speaking of what you mentioned, the curatorial way to choose artists and to collaborate with them, I might remember your one of the most important works, Relational Aesthetics. You wrote it in 90s, and then it was translated in many languages and also in English, and there was the whole polemics around it. Claire Bishop intervened, you well aware of that, and she was kind of criticizing your approach, and also the curatorial practice in Palais de Tokyo because of the importance of the curator, but also of the problem that was within the concept of relational aesthetics. It's how political it should be, in a way, if I understand it correctly. So how do you look back at this discussion that's been present at 10 years already?
I haven't been looking back at it for a long time, actually. Yeah. I'm really far away from it already, because, polemics, is something on the moment.
Yeah, sure.
It's something that lasts, 15 days for me, and then, then if you have a debate, it's more interesting. I think I answered all those questions. For example, in the text I wrote for the Guggenheim exhibition, it was in 2009, I think. So for me, it was like the closure of a chapter somehow. But I really believe still that the main ideas of relational aesthetics are absolutely still valid. What I tried to explain in this, in my answers to Claire Bishop, was that she didn't really criticize my book, but what she understood of the book, which is totally different, actually. Unfortunately, it doesn't match. So.
Yeah, sure. But coming back to the question of political art, or politics and art, which is pretty much present in your relational aesthetics and also in that polemics. To what extent art should be political or can be political? What are the possibilities of art to engage in the political processes, or even to create alternative political areas, as you put it, that you need, in a way, to detach yourself from the communication system, and as Deleuze put it, that the work of art is never something about communications. It's an act of resistance. So, and how do you see it these days? To what extent art should be political?
First, I don't know any artwork which is not political. No, every artwork is political. It does express a certain position of its author within the city, within the police, the society. So every artwork is in its essence, a political act, because you express values through doing it. Which kind of tools are you using? What's your position as a worker, in society? What's the imagery or the images in general that you're using? What is the purpose? How is it distributed, visible, seen? All of this is political, so you cannot escape from it. Then it's very different to express a political message, which is communication also, mainly. And I don't believe this is the most pertinent way of including politics in art. Then, of course, you have if every artwork is political, most of them are totally reactionary. That is something we have to assume also. And then if you are entering into a more progressive and open ways of seeing society, there are then many ways again to produce an artwork which corresponds to those values. Well, you have also the possibility of intervening, because art is an intervention also. You quoted Deleuze talking about resistance. I think I prefer the term intervention, because you can intervene in the realm of the real in many ways. It has many possible forms. And then you can consider that exactly what Badiou says about philosophy. Philosophy transforms itself and transforms the world by transforming it itself. It's what you do to philosophy which transforms the world. You could apply that to art, actually. Working on what art is also transforms the world indirectly. That's another option. But anyway, I tend to think that the most political issue for me, the highest political task of art, is to maintain us all in a state of awakening, in the situation where we can think that we can change things, that it's possible to change things. Why is a critique, a strong critique, expressed in forms? How can it be efficient? It can be efficient by showing us that what we see from society is just one way among others, and that we are not living in totally closed situation, but we can transform them. We can change it. What we think was obvious is not obvious. We can have an effect on reality. Art has this capacity of maintaining us at this level of understanding the world and keeping alive the idea of transforming the world.
But still, the form is important. It remains important. You mentioned Bourdieu, and he wrote a thing on inesthetics, meaning that art produces truth itself. It's not the form of it.
I don't follow him in this path.
But neither do I. But just provoking the idea. Why we need the word aesthetics these days? Why do we need to follow the ancient word through Baumgarten and Kant and whatever?
It's a very big word, It's about sensations, our sensations as human beings, within the world. That's what aesthetics, originally means, So it's not the narrow meaning of it, which was actually invented in the 18th century with Baumgarten or Kant or etc. So I prefer to talk about the old, meaning of aesthetics. The studies of our sensations, our sensible,
And in this way, I find your works and your thinking in tune with what Jacques Rancière does, although you had also the polemics with him, since he kind of criticized the relational art, but you responded by proposing the precariousness as a way to understand how the artwork functions. And yes, it would be nice to develop this concept of precariousness, and also having in mind the aesthetic regime of Byron's here. Is it in tune according to?
I developed the idea of the precariousness in the last book published in English, The Radicant. So I kept working on it, and is it in the last one? I have to remember. Yes, also. So I'm developing another idea, which is the idea of the specific forms which are of modern art and contemporary art, which are objects, which I call X forms, which are, let's say, object of a kind of fight between inclusion or exclusion. Artists want to get them back into the center, and the power wants them expelled as far as possible. So it can be ideological objects, or images, or also imaginary objects, actually. So it's a way to develop this idea of the precariousness, I think. But I'm not sure. Rancière actually, at the time he wrote this text, I'm not sure he read Relational Aesthetics. I think he read Claire Bishop's commentary on it, which is a total distortion of what I actually wrote. So yeah, sometimes not having first-hand information distorts completely the ideas you can have.
That's a feeling of mine as well. But
it's totally true, I'm certain.
Yeah. But still, developing your concept of precariousness, why do artists and artworks require this element of uncertainty or the risk? It might be also the way to measure the quality, turning back to our discussion we've been having previously. I mean,
it's part of the criteria.
Yeah.
Obviously, no. Uncertainty is also related to this state of uncomfort that I was discussing before, this idea that we should challenge every given idea we have on reality, every possible form that we think is stable and stays forever, but actually could be changed. Actually, it's this reflection by Slavoj Žižek saying that it's easier for people to envision the end of the world than the end of capitalism, for example. That's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Sometimes we just cannot see something else than what is. And art is this space where we can envision, many different alternatives to what we are living in.
There was a Lithuanian philosopher who wrote a book inspired by this phrase of Žižek's, Slavoj Žižek's view, but it's a whole other story. Anyway, talking about politics, art, and nepotism, there was a pretty recent event in your life that is related to your dismissal of Bozar, yeah, and there was some rumors that it was also the case of nepotism related even to Prime Minister or President François Hollande, and you yourself stated that after the discussion with the Minister of Culture, you were not given a single argument. What was it all about?
And they still don't exist, actually, which is the funniest thing you can think about. No, it's totally surreal, but the truth is actually, it was actually nepotism. It was only about putting this man, no matter his name, at my place. And as it was revealed a little bit before, when it was such a big object of scandal, they were obliged to step back, actually, and then they nominated an artist, a teacher of the school, because they had no other way to make it signifying, somehow. So it's politically quite clever, but that's the very beginning of it is this nepotism case. Yeah.
So What's the reaction? What was the reaction among artists in the French cultural circuit?
It was a huge fuss, actually, as much as summer can produce a huge fuss in France. Because obviously it was really clever too. They fired me on the 3rd of July, which is from the 14th, 15th of July, everybody goes to the beach, and that summer starts, and then people think about something else. Students were not in the school, teachers neither, so they limited the potential reactions to my dismissal. So it was well played, technically speaking.
And besides Kaunas Biennial, what are your projects now? What are you developing? Are you writing a new book?
I will publish next March in English a new book called The X Form that I've been telling you about. It's already been published in Spanish, actually, in South America, in Argentina. It was the first edition, actually. Why not? And in French, as soon as I find a publisher, I will see. But I'm also publishing a collection of essays from the last 20 years, all unpublished in French, actually. And the fact is, it's 2 volumes of it, more or less like 600 pages, because most of my work was not published in French, but mainly in English or other languages. So I wanted to gather them and make a kind of classification, with different themes. First volume is about time, and second about space. And the whole book is called Forms and Trajects, or Trajectories. Okay. Formes et trajets in French.
And I see you as a philosopher in many cases. All your works, all your books are really philosophical in their approach. Although I'm not sure if you are positioning yourself as a philosopher. However, you coined so many terms, like relational aesthetics or radicant or precariousness, and you propose those terms to contemporary art scene, and also having in mind Deleuze's idea that the philosophy is the one who constructs and creates concepts to open up experiences. You seem to do pretty much the same business. So how much philosophy is important for contemporary art? Also recalling one more thing, like Hegel's famous idea on the death of art. He supposed that the art should die in order to open up the way for philosophy. In a way, it happens these days. Philosophy is everywhere in contemporary art scene. How do you see this complicated relation between philosophy and art?
I'm not sure that art needs philosophy, but I'm sure it needs a thought, or thoughts behind it. I don't consider myself as a philosopher. I consider myself a curator who writes and tries to produce the theory of his practice, in a way. In this regard, I'm more into the family of Jacques Lacan than the one of Gilles Deleuze. Jacques Lacan is a psychoanalyst, and it was an oral, theory also through the seminars. And the way theory and practice are actually linked and intertwined in Jacques Lacan's writings is much closer, I think, to what a curator like me can do, always going back and forth between theory and practice, between the image and the text, between the visual world and the conceptual world. I think it's more of a model for me. The model of the psychoanalyst ones like Lacan, of course, because they're not all reaching the same level of theoretization. But yeah, for me it's really this go and return between this space, which is the space of the exhibition, and the space of the book, which constitutes my practice. But unlike a philosopher, I cannot invent a concept and try to apply it to art. It's the opposite. All my ideas come from the studios. All my ideas come from the artist's works. So I'm trying to transcribe something, to catch something. Here we go again with the psychoanalyst. I'm trying to catch something which I deliver and decode. I like this metaphor of the psychoanalyst.
Of course, also like Guattari as well.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah. It's funny because one of the artists in the exhibition, Roberto Cabot, has been very close to Federico Guattari.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was living at his place actually.
It would be nice. I haven't checked all the objects in the exhibition, but
not everything is visible yet.
Yes.
But because it's like a movie being shot. It seems like nothing happens, and then lots of things are happening at the same time. In a few minutes, coming from different places, and it assembles itself at the last moment.
And interrelating between them, among them, yeah. So, what would you point out as the important elements of your exhibition here in Kaunas Biennial, talking about artists and artworks? Can you comment on them as well?
I think in a word, but I would need to see the complete exhibition to fully answer your question. But at the moment, what I see is a kind of full display of answers to the question of distance and what it means in today's world. Because it doesn't have the same meaning today than 20 years ago only. Obviously, through the digital tools that we have now and the communication system that we can play with, but not only. It has transformed our way to envision distance, and that's the main riddle of the exhibition for me at this point. But I might have a different answer next week.
Yeah, it would be interesting to be a recurring guest in your exhibition every week or 2 days, when to follow how it changes and shifts and moves.
Because it does.
Obviously, as every good exhibition of contemporary art. But talking about distance and also your idea of relational aesthetics that is still present, I might ask also the question regarding the context of contemporary art, which is trying to break up with correlation, and I'm pointing to the idea of Quentin Meillassoux, speculative realism or object-oriented ontology, Graham Harman and Ray Bercier and others. And it seems that artists and curators were tired of even social and political element and human element in art, and tried to provoke something in philosophy by establishing the whole new school of philosophy that is pretty trendy these days. And we talk about shows that are dedicated to pre-human, conscious life, to minerals, to objects that have a separate life, apart from consciousness, apart from human mind. So how do you see this break with even the tradition of relational aesthetics that was really present as an opposition in a way, to trying to produce something that is beyond the human world?
Yeah, first, I see Quentin Meillassoux, in Paris. Many times he's a friend, and yeah, sure. I introduced him to Pierre Huyghe actually, which was a very interesting discussion that we had. And so I'm not far from his thoughts, but he actually told me that he had the impression of being a little bit caricatures, in the recent debates, because obviously there is no art without correlation for me. So it's impossible. Art is an object which by itself needs the poetic consciousness to carry it. It's impossible to make an exhibition for objects. Mark Leakey did a very interesting show about it, actually. It remains a poetic debate somehow. But this new deal, in a way, between a new ghost dance, as I used to say, between the animal, the object, and the human and the machine, was the theme of my previous exhibition in Taipei, the Taipei Biennial. But it strangely has echoes here. Actually, for example, in Pakui Hardware's work, in the silicone objects of Roberto Cabot, in Katia Novitskova's work, you feel that many times. Like even if it was not foreseen, at the very beginning of the exhibition, it's still such a strong interrogation for artists today. The status of the object, our relations to the object, how can we envision them having relations? That it transpires everywhere in the exhibition. So it's kind of strange and interesting to see that the theme, is actually popping up, everywhere in the exhibition too.
But it's also an ethical question, I suppose, especially talking about animals and pre-human life and in pre-human worlds, in a way. Since we are, affecting our world with global warming and with all the technological effects, that in a way that we cannot anymore sustain the same ethical coordinates or trajectories. So do you think that this challenge and this question regarding ethics and let's say it's an animal or a beast or something otherness relates to contemporary art as well? Can contemporary art say something on the ethics, on the new ethics of humanity?
As a citizen, any artist can express his or her thoughts on the subject. I'm not certain that art is a place of production for ethical norms. I think it's a place of suspension of belief, in a place of ethical suspension in some ways, where you can, nothing, is totally immune to art. And there's no aspect of reality that art cannot question, including ethics, including beliefs, including whatever you want. So it's exactly the place where norms cannot be produced, but it's a place which questions norms. So in terms of, if we talk about ethical attitudes, I tend to think that it's more material coming into the artwork than a specific notion that could be associated to art.
Yeah, sure. I'm asking this because I'm noticing the element of, let's call it nature, in many cases where there are Lithuanian artists called Urbonai, and they have this project of zooethics.
Yeah, sure.
And in Pierre Huyghe we find a lot of
it's not an ethical approach.
Yeah, of course.
I think that there's an ethical element in it, obviously, but his ambition is not to produce a norm or to dictate, something.
Definitely, I'm talking about ethics more in a post-Levinasian way, not having any norms or preconstituted virtues, but rather the encounter with other, whatever it might mean.
In terms of recognition, I agree.
Yes.
In terms of responsibility,
yes.
I agree. Now,
Yeah,
if you mention Levinas, now I get exactly what you want to say.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Then I agree.
Yeah, and maybe my final question would be regarding your idea of Alte Modern and the modernity in general, and your criticism towards postmodernity and modernity. And by provoking the discussion, I would remind you Bruno Latour, who wrote his famous book on We Have Never Been Modern, and then he showed it, in a very elegant way that modernity is an illusion which is based on the distinction between nature and society or culture. And when we dig deeper, we find those hybrids, the links, the networks that are still present, the pre-modern thing that is still present. So it's a kind of a self-deceptive idea that we are modern. How do you find it, and how do you deal with it in your alter modern, where, as I get it, you try to show that we need to find other ways of being modern. No. So what do you mean by this modernity in this case?
Anyway, modern is such a big word that at the end it means nothing. So we all know that, according to the different context we're using, if it's architecture, it has a different meaning. If you were in the art world, and art history, it has a different meaning. We all know it's a totally fully loaded word which defines something which is very vague. So postmodern is even more vague, and people thought I was crazy in 2009 when I announced the idea that postmodernism is finished, and it was 1973, 2008, with a very precise datation. Because we know it's also an historical, cultural fiction, and that's not more than that. But people are actually still so much attached to this idea of the post something, and that's what I wanted to fight against in a way. People call post-internet, for example. We're not in the post-internet era, we're fully into the internet era. So why post? It's really weird. This idea that fear of being in the suburbs of history, in a way, being after something, but we are not living fully a specific period. So I wanted to get rid of this idea of coming too late with the idea, very naive idea of reinventing a possible modernity, because modern, at least, is lived, in the present. So we need, a new set of theories and notions to be fully able to understand that we are making history and we are not after history. We are not postmodern anymore. We are able to produce a new modernity. It depends on me of a certain will and to get rid of some preconceived ideas about history.
And what that other modernity would be? Do you have your own idea?
It was more a question mark actually than an affirmation. I didn't come with a set of rules saying this will be altermodernism. No, I'm saying I think that the form of it could only be archipelagic in a way. It could only be an archipelago of ideas more than a very massive shape. It might be collecting to a new, renewed notion of nomadism, because we are experiencing today, a very different world than our only 50 years ago. And thinking about the refugees crisis at the moment, for example, it obliges us to rethink completely some notions. So I indicated a few tracks, a few leads, but not more than that. And I think that's has to be a collective, effort. And this effort is actually produced now, because in many studios, many philosophers, writers, etc., are actually producing a new set of ideas which are kind of connected to what I was describing as altermodern. So I'm trying to check where it leads.
So thank you very much.
You're welcome.